All right, welcome everyone. Today we're diving deep into something that, well, has bothered people for a long time, like forever. How do we make sense of faith, justice, and suffering, all kind of wrapped up together? And lucky for us, we've got some seriously powerful texts to help us out. We're looking at an excerpt from the book of Job, specifically chapter 8, and then switching gears a bit, a poem called On the Slaughter.
Yeah, quite a combo, right? It's interesting. You've got this ancient story, Job, the guy who's like the definition of righteousness, but then bam, all this awful stuff happens to him, so much loss and pain. And then on the other side, this super intense poem, thinking into suffering and faith in a very, I don't know, in-your-face kind of way.
Totally. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack. How can these two texts, written so far apart, show us such different ways of looking at this, well, this struggle? I guess it's a human struggle, it's been around forever. But let's get started with Job. Now, some people might not know this, but it's a story from the Hebrew Bible. This guy, Job, he's totally devoted to God, but then tragedy after tragedy hits him. And in chapter 8, one of his friends, Bildad, he tries to explain, to make sense of why all this bad stuff is happening.
Right. Bildad's view, it all comes from this very traditional idea of God's justice. He's convinced that God is, like, inherently just. So basically, any suffering we go through, it has to be because of something we did, our actions, or maybe it's all part of this huge divine plan that we as humans just can't wrap our heads around. We're not meant to get it.
So hold on, is he saying that Job messed up somehow? Or maybe his kids? That they did something to deserve all this, even if Job himself doesn't realize it?
Pretty much, yeah. He even suggests that Job's children might have sinned, and that's why they died. And that Job, well, he survived, right? So that means he has a chance to, like, repent, turn things around, and eventually be restored. Like it's a second chance.
Oof, man. If I were Job, hearing that from a friend, I don't know, that would be rough.
No kidding.
Yeah.
But what's interesting here is how Bildad uses these metaphors, right?
Yeah.
To kind of soften the blow and make his point.
Yeah.
He compares Job to, like, crops that die before they're ripe.
Oh, okay. So he's saying all that material stuff, wealth and success, it doesn't last. It's like, don't sweat it, Job. What you lost wasn't that important anyway.
Exactly. He's really emphasizing the spiritual side. Focus on growing spiritually and trust that God's got a plan, even when things are awful. And this idea, it connects to a bigger Jewish theological perspective. Think about it. Jewish people have gone through centuries of persecution and hardship, but they're still here, right? And some people see that as proof that, hey, the story's not over. Keep the faith because God will step in eventually.
So Bildad represents a kind of faith that can handle anything, even the worst suffering, because it's looking ahead towards a bigger plan, beyond what's happening right now.
Yeah, that's it. It's about believing that even when things are incredibly painful and you feel lost, there's this bigger picture unfolding. And in that picture, God's justice prevails, even if we can't see it right now, with our limited human perspective in this moment.
Got it. Okay. But now let's switch gears and look at On the Slaughter. This poem by Chaim Nachman Bialik, a Hebrew poet, it's completely different, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, totally different vibe. While Bildad is all about patience and accepting God's will, this poem, it's a straight-up cry for justice right now, like super raw and emotional. There's this feeling of urgency, a need for someone to be held accountable, which is the opposite of Bildad's, more laid-back approach.
And it's crucial to remember the historical context, right? Because a lot of people believe Bialik wrote this in response to pogroms, those attacks on Jewish communities. Brutal stuff.
Right, absolutely. Knowing that context adds a whole new layer to his words. Just try to imagine what he saw, the pure horror of these attacks. And the poem doesn't shy away from it at all. It talks about the blood, the gallows, the earth itself. It's all soaked in suffering, It's heavy.
Yeah, and that line, justice now, it's like he's yelling at God, like, how can you just sit there and watch this happen?
Exactly. It's raw emotion, the human response to suffering, the anger, the outrage, the need for someone to answer for this, the refusal to accept that it's all part of some plan we can't understand. Bialik's poem forces us to confront the big question. If God's so just, why do innocent people suffer? And why doesn't he stop it?
It's like we're looking at two totally separate worlds, Bildad, he's coming from this place of ancient wisdom, acceptance. And then Bialik, his words are so raw, you can practically still feel the suffering he saw.
Yeah, and that's what's so powerful about these two pieces. We put them side by side. It's like they show us the two main ways humans deal with suffering, especially when we try to make it fit with our faith.
Okay, so on one side, you've got Bildad basically saying that suffering, it's either punishment for sin, which honestly, that's hard to accept, or it's part of this massive divine plan that we, with our little human minds, just can't grasp.
Right. And that brings up a really interesting point. If we buy that we can't really get God's justice, I mean, does that actually comfort us? Or is it just a way to brush it off? Like, is it helping us make sense of faith and suffering, or are we avoiding a really tough question? What do you think?
Wow, that's a good question. It could be both, right? Depends on your own experiences, I guess. But then you have Bialik. He's not about waiting around for some big cosmic explanation or for justice to happen way down the line. He wants it now. He wants someone to answer for what happened, for the victims who are suffering right here, right now.
Absolutely. And when he does that, Bialik, he gives a voice to that raw human experience of pain, the kind of pain that makes you question everything you thought you knew, even your faith.
Okay, so where do we go from here? How do we deal with these two ideas? They seem like opposites. Bildad's acceptance based on faith and Bialik's burning need for justice. Can we even reconcile them?
Maybe it's not about forcing them to fit together. Maybe it's more about recognizing the value in both of them. Like, it doesn't have to be one or the other. Bildad, he offers comfort, a way to understand suffering as part of something bigger, in a spiritual way. But Bialik, he reminds us that it's okay to be angry at injustice, to demand better for ourselves and for everyone. That anger, it can push us to make real changes, positive changes.
I like that. It's like we need both. The acceptance to help us through hard times and that fire, that passion that drives us to fight for a better world, a more just world. Maybe it's the tension between those two things that keeps us moving forward, both spiritually and in our actions, and making the world better.
That's a great way to put it. It's that tension that makes us human, that makes us question, makes us search for meaning. And maybe, just maybe, it's in that struggle, the back and forth, that we understand ourselves better, our relationship with God, and our responsibility to each other.
It's almost like we have to hold these two, I don't know, contradictory ideas in our heads at the same time. Accepting suffering, like it's part of God's plan, but also this burning desire for justice, like right now. How do we even start to make sense of that?
Yeah, it's tough. Maybe it's not about finding the perfect answer, one that explains everything. Maybe it's about like embracing that tension. The fact that we struggle with these questions, the fact that suffering seems so random sometimes, maybe that's what makes us human. We can have faith and doubt at the same time, acceptance, but also resistance. It's all part of it.
So you're saying that just wrestling with these ideas, that's part of being human, especially in a world where suffering, well, it's just a fact of life.
Exactly. And maybe it's in that tension, that back and forth, between faith and doubt, between just accepting things and demanding justice. Maybe that's where we grow, where we find deeper meaning, where we're inspired to actually do something, make a difference.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a sec, just recap. We've got Bildad offering that traditional theological comfort, right? Be patient. Trust God's justice will come in the end. And then we have Bialik, just raw emotion, demanding action now. Someone needs to be held accountable. They both show us something really valuable about how faith, justice, and human suffering all connect.
Yeah, and it's amazing how these two pieces, written centuries apart, such different styles, they're both talking about the same human struggle,
Yeah.
How do we deal with suffering? How do we keep believing when bad things happen? And how do we find meaning, purpose when the world can feel so random and cruel? It's like, it makes no sense.
Which brings us to a big question for you, for all of you listening, as you think about your own experiences and these huge questions. What are you taking away from all this? What really sticks with you?
The main thing, I think, is that there's no one right way to react to suffering. There's no magic answer that works for everyone. The important thing is that you face these questions honestly. Really be real with yourself. Let yourself feel all those emotions that come up and try to find different perspectives, ideas that challenge what you think you know and help you understand better.
And maybe, just maybe, as you question, as you wrestle with these ideas, you'll find some hope, some way forward, a way to deal with the pain, but also hold on to the possibility of a world that's more just, more compassionate. We can make it better.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And as we wrap up this deep dive, one last thing to think about. Imagine yourself facing unimaginable suffering. Would you lean on Bildad's faith, accept things, and trust in God? Or would you be right there with Bialik, demanding justice right here, right now? Something to think about. That's a powerful question to end on. Really makes you think. Thanks to everyone for joining us for this deep dive into faith, justice, and human suffering. Some heavy stuff, but so important. And we really encourage you to check out those texts yourselves. Keep thinking about these questions in your own lives. Until next time.